Is Israel blocking aid, humanitarian aid to the northern parts of Gaza? That's something that has been alleged by many world leaders and I believe also by the UN itself that this has been happening from around the start of this month. That basically there were no aid trucks going into northern parts of Gaza. Netanyahu, or rather the Israeli administration, was asked about this if there is humanitarian aid going in, since there are reports that there isn't. And it looks like the answer was there is, but they've avoided the answering the idea that how much aid trucks went in, sort of saying that there actually might not be. And despite the fact that the way I've sort of set up the topic is as I'm almost criticizing Israeli government for not allowing the aid in, it's actually the actual opposite, and you can see it from the title. I think if this is true, which first I read it as true. I first read it sort of, I had the title there, and the title was something like the question was, is Netanyahu stopping aid to Gaza? And I read it as Netanyahu is stopping aid to Gaza. So I got very excited about this topic, which, and later when I reread the article, I was a bit misled. Um, so we don't have to talk about the question if it's true or not. We don't have to talk about it a lot. But James, and also welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James. So James, a question for you. We don't have to specifically answer if this is happening or not, but apparently, if it is happening, it might be sort of a tactic by Netanyahu to really sort of root out the last remains of any resistance when it comes to Hamas. So the supposed goal is basically stop the aid coming in until they are sure there are no terrorists in the north of Gaza. Just a reminder, north of Gaza has been cleared once, and then in many places Hamas resurfaced, so then it was cleared again, and now it looks like there are still remnants of Hamas. So,
Hmm.
James, what do you think about this
Well, how do you
tactic?
suppose that happens, Daniel? How do you suppose that we clear through northern Gaza and okay, got the terrorists? Then how does that happen? It's because we warn the civilian population. The civilian population moves around because we're trying to be kind to the civilian population. That is what shows the failure of Israel's approach so far. No, cutting off humanitarian aid is essential for the war effort. Going after the quote civilian population is essential to any moral self-defensive war measure, whatever. The civilian population makes the war possible. For every soldier fighting, there has to be a whole bunch of civilians feeding them, clothing them, housing them, building their weapons. There are many times more civilians who are part of the war machine killing Israelis than there are actual fighters launching rockets or going in on October 7th to kill people and do atrocities. But notice what happened on October 7th. It wasn't just the planned Hamas fighters who came in, paragliding in and breaking down the fence. It was just a bunch of Gazan, quote, civilians who came in and joined in on the atrocities and the attacks on October 7th. No, if there isn't a widespread support from the civilians, the war by the soldiers cannot happen in any war. In any war, civilians, if you're going to win a war, a valid war of self defense, you must go after the supporting civilian population. You must. Otherwise, you're not doing the responsible thing in defending yourself. It is those civilians who make the soldiers possible. Now, Hamas doesn't even wear uniforms. Hamas uses civilians, and civilians apparently were happy to be used in this fashion. Because if you don't wear uniforms, then there's no distinction. We are the people of Gaza, all of us. And by that fact, Hamas has put a target. In fact, the Nazi government, let's go back to World War II. If you were just a farmer in Germany, the Nazi government has put a target on your back because farmers in Germany are feeding the Nazi government and the Nazi army and the guards at Auschwitz. So farmers in Germany are valid targets so we can stop the feeding and perpetuating of the Nazi war machine and the Holocaust. That is the only correct way of approaching it. innocent civilians in Lebanon, if they're not trying to kick out Hezbollah right now actively, look, Israel did not occupy Gaza before October 7th. For many years, the Palestinians controlled Gaza. Israelis forced the government of Israel forced Israelis out of Gaza. Similarly with Lebanon. For many years now, there's been no occupying force in southern Lebanon, as there have been in times before. Israel was not occupying those places. The civilian populations in those areas are responsible for the governments that control them. The pro-Hezbollah government in Lebanon, the Hamas elected leadership in Gaza, that is the fault of the civilians. Now, you say, could there be innocent civilians? Well, look, one country cannot control the jurisdiction, the details separating out, and it's not up to the defender to separate out, the innocent civilians from the civilians who are part of the war machine. No, that is not the duty of the defending government. They weren't in control of that government, of that territory, that jurisdiction. If you're in Nazi Germany, if you're in Gaza, if you're in Lebanon, you either actively undermine your government or you get the hell out. That is your moral responsibility, or you are a valid target. When the government that you're getting along and going along with is attacking an innocent government, is engaged in aggressive action against the people of another country. No, civilians must be a valid target. You must cut off humanitarian supplies. You must starve them when necessary. You cannot send them aid. It is obscene to send the civilian population aid when that civilian population is supporting a war machine. And it is up to that civilian population to overthrow that government, or they make themselves, and all of them, including their children, targets, valid targets. You put a target on the back of yourself, of everyone else in your community, insofar as you support the horrific government. You get along and go along. Oh, well, I'm just a farmer, or I just sew uniforms. No, well, you're part of the war machine. Well, Hamas doesn't even wear uniforms, which especially puts a target on all of their civilian backs. No, I wish Netanyahu would cut off all food aid. All food aid. The only way you're going to get the attention of the population of Gaza. Now, would you say, is that genocide? No, it is not. If that's genocide, then every self-defensive war ever committed in human history was genocide. The civilian population. Look, did America want to wipe out all Germans just because they were Germans, in the same way that the Nazis wanted to wipe out all Jews just because they were Jews? No. No. Do Israelis today just want to wipe out every Arab Muslim around them? No. No. But when you're being attacked by a whole country, like when you're being attacked by an organization, when you're attacked by the equivalent of a government like Hamas controlling Gaza, or the Lebanese government which supports Hezbollah, then guess what? Yeah, that's exactly the situation. The civilians in Lebanon and Gaza are valid targets. They must be starved, they must be killed until the population understands the evil that their government is doing. And if we don't have that kind of moral clarity, then you're giving some kind of moral sanction to the attackers. It's that simple. So I wish Netanyahu would do this. This is, like you say, it's a hope of mine that finally he would recognize that the civilian population must suffer, or this will never come to an end. It's a formula for perpetual war. We won World War II not by feeding the Japanese and the Germans. We won World War II by crushing the entire system that supported evil governments, including the, quote, civilian infrastructure. It must be gone after. You don't feed your enemies. That is to perpetuate evil and to perpetuate war. And they must understand that we have that kind of moral clarity about it, or it will go on and on and on. Promise.
Yeah, so we talked about attacking civilians, and the fact is, we are not even there. We are not even at the point where we're discussing if it's, acceptable to attack Palestinian farms or, something in a similar area. The fact is, the point that we're at is that we have literally been supplying Hamas with with supplies. We have been, and I'm not even talking since October 7. We've been supplying them even before. Gaza has been the biggest recipient
Oh
of
no,
aid.
Brits and Americans have been funding the education, funding the hateful, mystic, racist Hamas ideology is being educated to the Palestinian children on the UN dime. That is to say, the American and British taxpayers back. We are educating them in hatred. We are paying, there were Hamas operatives in UNRWA. We are paying the salary of Hamas terrorists. That's right. In Britain and the United States, taxpayers have been paying for the killers of October 7th to do what they did. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's
Yeah.
so far from attacking their farmers, we're feeding them. Now that's absolutely insane. Can you imagine? No. First thing we got to do with the Nazis is make sure every German is fed and has medical attention, because after all German civilians must be innocent. Now that would be absolutely obscene. That would be betrayal of everyone in Europe who was being attacked by the Nazis. That would be betrayal of every Jew and Gypsy who was rounded up and sent to a concentration camp. An absolute betrayal if you don't go after the civilians. It's that simple.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine if before, before in the 30s, before World War II, if America, France, and UK have been funding the Hitlerjugend or the Shintoist
We
religion
were
in
funding
the
them enough. We were building back the Nazis. And by the way, the Soviets. If it weren't for Western aid, Western trade, Western food aid, Western businesses going in, the Soviet Empire and the Nazi regime would never have actually built up to the way they were. We were funding them. We fund the evil that destroys us. And if we haven't apparently learned the lesson yet, we're going backwards. Now we want to aggressively fund the worst aggressors and terrorists and monsters in the world. Got to feed them, shelter them, house them, protect every civilian who might be supporting them, because we couldn't attack anyone who isn't an active holder of a gun. Well, that is ridiculous. You can never win a war that way. And that's not, I mean, look, their will has to be crushed. The only way their will is ever going to be crushed is that when they understand that, no, we are going to fight and kill you guys until you stop attacking us, until you are no longer able to, until you are psychologically crushed to the point of knowing that you will suffer if you continue to support these monsters. That and only that will do.
Yeah, and just drawing on more, well, not even parallels because this is not happening, but sort of the things that were happening during the Second World War. So my biggest find, I think earlier this year, was the Operation Starvation. I don't think you can get more explicit than that, which was basically a convoy raiding campaign by the US on Japan, basically to completely deprive them of all supply lines. And by the end of the World War II, the Japanese people were actually starving because everything was going towards the war machine. And people were actually starving. That's the way. And from the report, when they look back at the Operation Starvation and try to evaluate it, it was said that if it started sooner, it could have ended the war by years. And even the fact that it has been, because I think it only started in like 44, and if it or maybe even 45, like late 44, early 45, and if it had been used sooner and stronger, it would have ended the war much sooner. And even the fact that it was used that late was also most likely able to make the war end much sooner. But sort of, even going to the idea of responsibility. I mean, just imagine when it comes to the Palestinians starving. Uh, Many people say I use, I try to use examples too much, and maybe they are not always appropriate. But sort of, imagine if you had like a girlfriend and she was crazy, and she said if you leave her, she will kill herself. I mean, again, is your responsibility what she's going to do. And crazy
Right.
example. But again, going back to Hamas, Hamas has started this war. Hamas has decided on October 7th to sort of break, not even peace, but break this sort of stalemate that was going on in favor of more aggression, in favor of more, basically just trying to kill as many Jews, take as many as you can hostages, and try to kill basically as many people as you can in the process. And they've started this, they are, and now we've heard about the Palestinians starving since October 7th. It hasn't, every week there's a report, there's a starvation coming. The
We're on the edge. We're at
and
the
we
edge of starvation. We're right there, about to happen. A humanitarian crisis has been looming now for a year.
Yeah, we've been hearing about it, but even if it came to it, even if it came to the fact, and let's we don't know if this is happening in the
It
north. If
should have
Netanyahu
happened
did,
starting a year ago. It should have been happening. We should have been starving the Gazan population starting a year ago. What were all those aid trucks going in for? To feed the enemy? Now, I mean, it doesn't take a PhD. You don't have to be Albert Einstein to figure out that feeding and supporting the civilian population. Well, we've got to make sure they've got good food and clean water. First thing, the enemy population that is supporting and is the infrastructure undergirding the attackers. Like I was saying, for every attacker, there have to be a whole lot of civilians making them possible, feeding them, clothing them, etc. With the munitions, there are a mass of many, many more civilians who are guilty and part of the war machine than there are actual fighters. And so it's obscene to think, okay, and of course, like I say, you don't have to be a PhD to figure out, we might not win this war if we keep feeding the people who are feeding the killers. Right, right. You have to stop feeding the killers. You have to stop celebrating the killers. You have to stop supporting the killers in every way, or you have a target on your back. We've got to kill you, so you stop the support of the people who are killing us. It's really simple logic. You cannot win a war by feeding the enemy civilians. Civilians. Civilians must be a target in any war. I'll put that in italics in case anyone missed that. And it's not the fault of the attacker. It's not the responsibility of Israel. It's not the responsibility of America to reduce collateral damage. And if we think that we're making points with them, we're going to get popular with them because we're not hitting mosques and we're not hitting, civilian targets. That is bizarre. Bizarre when you think about the ideology of suicide bombers, the ideology of people who are happy to be martyrs to kill Jews. Just listen to the UNRWA taught propaganda. They're raising kids to be proud to be martyrs and throw their lives away for the great cause of destroying Israel and killing Jews. No, you have to stop it at the root. You have to attack the civilian population from which this comes. We think it's not genocide, quite the opposite. It's the ending of the war. We would be doing the biggest favor to these people by delivering them the proper message that they're living under savages, okay, who are doing them no favors, never creating a peaceful or prosperous place for them to live, but existing for one thing, their racist, murderous, mystically founded hatred of Israel.
Yeah, so and again, we are not even at the point where when the question is, should we target civilians? The question even is, should we feed them? And again, the idea of like starving, like population actively dying for starvation, for it to get to that point, again, you have to realize this when it comes to history. There's very few times when it has actually happened in the state of the war. And the main reason is because once you get to that sort of state, once you get to the state your population is literally starving and is about to die, then you do anything you can to stop the war and basically try to even surrender unconditionally just so you can prevent that. Again, that happened with Germany, that happened with well, not much with Germany, that happened with Japan, but they surrendered because they had no way of actively continuing the war. And the fact that if you are like a Palestinian, you have absolutely no willingness to do anything about this conflict. You are being fed, things are being provided to you. It's of course not an ideal situation, is because you do live in an active war zone, but there is nothing pushing you, or let alone if there is any push, it is towards Israel, because Israel is the one that seemingly, because when you see the rockets coming down, it is obviously the Israeli rockets, the Israel trying to destroy Hamas. So your immediate reaction is to Israel, and unless it's hard enough, you'll never look for what is the actual reason why we're here. And the fact that, again, when we talk about Palestinians, those are not North Koreans with no access to the internet. They have phones, they have access to media. Most of them do read Al Jazeera, which is a bit problematic, but they have access to, as long as you have access to internet, you have access to the world, and they have access to it. So they have a chance to see about, they have a chance to see basically what's going on, and they actively refuse to do so because we don't see any uprisings against Hamas. We have a sweet summer child comment from El Rito, who says, "There's no way actions Israel does are in favor of their enemies. There has to be an ulterior motive that benefits Israel in the end." Let me introduce to a term called altruism. You would be surprised how many people actively do support their enemies and do what hurts them. And
Right.
Israel is doing exactly that. Israel is defending Palestinian population and hurting their own soldiers or their own civilians in the process. I mean, again, what was for example, the Gilad Shalit host no swap, basically, getting one soldier, which, okay, Israel should do anything it can to bring back their hostages or their soldiers home, but getting one soldier home and releasing thousands of terrorists,
That's obscene.
many of them who have had hands or have directly committed October 7th. Uh, Again, you can't look at that action and saying this is not absolutely fueled by altruism or fueled by basically absolutely ignoring what is necessary to basically have a proper society, have your citizens be safe. Because again, that is sacrificing your own citizens in favor of terrorists.
There is no moral justification for Israel sending out warnings before an attack happens. Before they would bomb a building in Gaza, they would send text messages, they would alert people and to drop leaflets, literally multiple ways. The IDF would warn the quote civilian population to get out of the building or get out of the area that was about to get bombed. That there is no pro-Israel reason for that. There is none. It's pure altruism. They were playing to international. Their only reason, questioner, was to play to international politics and play on the heartstrings, this altruistic heartstrings. And it all began, well, it didn't all begin, but you see, what the ideology that dominates in the West comes from, like Christianity, where Jesus says, turn the other cheek, submit to the evildoer, love your enemy. Well, that is to sanction your enemy. That is to protect and coddle the Adolf Hitlers of the world. Jesus said, submit to Adolf Hitler, turn the other cheek when he invades Poland. That's what Jesus was advocating. That morality has corrupted Western thinking for almost the better part of the last 2,000 years. And so Israel has got to play a game of politics, appeasing this ridiculous self-sacrificial. And it is self-sacrificial. There is nothing good that will happen. Israeli interests, the interests of civilization, cannot be furthered by fighting a war like that. The only way you're going to help Israel is to end the war quickly. And indeed, by the way, and it's a secondary thing, help the population of Gaza, is to end Hamas, is to go right after them, include the civilian population, so the civilian population gets it. Now, that would be the kindest thing we could do. Instead, we have this twisted view that, no, we've got to sacrifice, die, self-immolate is the only way to fight a war. Well, that's obscene. You cannot win a war self-sacrificially. You don't. You know, George Patton, the American general during World War II, had a great saying: no one has ever won a war by dying for his country. He won the war by making the other dumb son of a bitch die for his country. And that's the whole point. They have to die for their cause. When they start killing you, you have to make them die for that cause. And until you get that clear, it's perpetual war. It's endless war. It's endless civilian suffering. It's endless terrorism. That's what that's a formula for. No, the best thing that Israel, the only thing it needs to do is protect its own people. And that means destroying the problem completely, psychologically, physically eliminate their capacity to attack. That's what Israel needs to do for Israel. But by the way, step back and look at the world and history. You're not doing anyone any favors by not winning a war decisively against tyrannical monsters like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the mullahs of Iran.
We have a super sticker from Bonnie. Thank you so much. We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says, I have no sympathy for Lebanese or Gaza civilians. Well, whenever we talk about them, I have a sympathy for the best within those societies. If there is such a thing, if I haven't heard much, but if there is something, of course, and any good people dying in a war is a tragedy, and any innocent people, just talking about,
Children.
even saying innocent children is sort of like a not an oxymoron, but redundant. Of course, children
Of
are
course,
innocent
small
by
children are
by
always,
default.
yeah,
But
small
yeah,
children.
you have to think about who is responsible for that, and it cannot be the country that has been attacked and is trying to eradicate the country, or sort of the the country, or the sort of the system that has attacked them. We also have a super chat from another super chat from PC, I should say. Thank you so much. It says, James, Palestinian society is messed up. It definitely is. And we also have a super chat from Mary, who says, I like the crazy ex-friend stalker analogy. Well, thank you. I try my best to come up with good analogies.
You know, PC, who I admire. I admire those Germans who tried to take out Hitler. I admire the people in the French resistance and the Polish resistance who were fighting the occupying Nazi governments in their countries. Those were heroes. Those were heroes. And if I were to walk up to resistance, anti-Nazi resistance people on the continent of Europe, and I would tell them, well, shouldn't the Americans and the Brits pull their punches and hold back and feed the enemy and worry about the civilian population? They would be the first ones to say, don't you dare. Don't you dare. You make these governments and these populations suffer. Have to. You have to. See, there was a different kind of understanding of the moral clarity of the situation in those days. Today, there is no moral understanding like that. It does not exist. And altruism, ladies and gentlemen, the philosophy that Ayn Rand so brilliantly criticized and took down as the anti-life philosophy that it is, as the self-immolating demand for human sacrifice that it is. Altruism is what is polluting the minds in the West and forcing onto Israel a so-called quote unquote moral policy, which is nothing like moral, which is anti-life and can only perpetuate civilian suffering, dictatorship, and terrorism. No, we have to. We'll just return to my theme. We have to go after the civilian populations of such countries. That is the only moral thing to do, both for yourself and for the world.
And as a Czechoslovak patriot, I'd like to thank the people who killed Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most important people behind the Holocaust, and also behind the sort of occupation of Bohemia and Moravia. Because I live in Slovakia, I have different patriotic status, but that's besides the point. I want to see the Reinhard Heydrich assassinators, or their soul ancestors, or soul descendants in Gaza. I want to see Gazans killing Sinwar. That's one thing that they would bring us to some sort of better society when it comes to Gaza. The fact is that the population has to get rid of their own dictators. If someone else gets rid of them for you, you'll never really stand up to what you need to basically achieve freedom.
There is no anti-terrorist resistance in Gaza. There is none, none that I can see. In Iran, for example, there have been times a woman disappears into Iranian
Well,
prison.
we'll keep that for the reality show because we're already
Okay,
2 minutes
okay.
over.
But the
But
point is that we should help when the civilian populations are trying to overthrow an aggressive dictatorship that's ruling them, as in Iran. Um, we're betraying those people, in fact. We're betraying the good people in Iran when we don't lift a finger to take out the monsters in Tehran.
and we'll talk some more about the people of Iran, or more about Iran itself and what has been happening. Basically, it's almost 2 weeks since the attack on Israel by Iran. I should say the second attack by
Second,
Iran on
the
Israel.
bigger,
So we'll
yeah.
see you on the reality show in just about a minute or so. We're gonna be talking about the West has given up. So make sure to join us. We'll be there in just a second.